Hey guys, Matt here with Project X. Today we're going to show you how to install the Project X Series 1 Bronco roof mount on your 2-door or 4-door 2021 and up Ford Bronco. So first, a couple of things about this bracket. We designed this as a bolt-on application for your 2021 and up Bronco. It can hold up to 6 FF.70 lights on it. It is made out of stainless steel and it does come powder coated. It's also got a provision for a ghost box on the back side of it if you want to mount one to it. Although on this installation, we will not be using the ghost box on the bracket itself. Being fans of classic desert racing ourselves, we designed this bracket to pay homage to those older classic Broncos that had the iconic round lights on the roof. In this video, we're going to show you how to mount the FF.70s to this bracket and then take the bracket and mount it on your Bronco. And then we're going to show you how to wire it to your existing ghost box system. So our first step is going to be unboxing this FF.70 and removing the factory bracket that comes on it when you pull it out of the box. Just going to remove this packaging. And here we have the FF.70 with the bracket that we're going to be removing is right here. As you guys can see, there's a couple of caps on either end of the bracket here. We're just going to pop those off with a flathead screwdriver. We got one there and two. And once you have those caps off, you can see the exposed hardware here. The nut is going to be a 17 millimeter and the bolt is going to be a 15 millimeter. So it helps to have two different ratcheting sockets to be able to get this bracket off. And it's really easy. You just set the light down, get your hardware in place. Just break that bolt loose. Then you can just loosen the rest of it by hand. And then you want to pull the bolt, the washer, and the nut out and just set that aside. You're not going to be using this bracket for this install, so you can set it back in your box if you'd like to hang on to it. You'll notice once you take the factory bracket off the light that there's going to be two washers sitting inside this indentation on either side of the light. These do need to be retained on the light when you install it to the new bracket, so make sure you don't lose these. Okay, so now we're ready to put our lights on the bracket, and we like to do the floods on the outside, the two outside tabs for the floods. And if you do forget which one's a flood and which one's a spot, there is a sticker on the bottom here that tells you that. So make sure you got these washers in place, and you're simply going to just slide the light in between the tabs, keeping those washers in place, and you're going to use the hardware that you took off of the factory bracket to reinstall this onto the new bracket. Push it all the way through, then you're going to make sure you put your washer on there, and then finally the nut on the other side. Just give it a good hand tightening right now. So for right now, we're just going to tighten these down snug with a 17 and a 15 millimeter wrench, just so that you can adjust these once they're on the vehicle. Then once you have the lights positioned the way you want, you can tighten them all the way down. So as you can see, it's not too tight where you can still move it, but it's not loose and just flopping around either. Now you're going to repeat this process for all the other 5 lights on this bracket. So like we mentioned, you can run a ghost box on this bracket if you're not going to be installing a full ghost box system. But since this Bronco already has a full ghost box kit installed, we're not going to be using this ghost box on the bracket. Supplied with your kit for your roof bar is going to be this wiring harness. This is going to be delivering all the power to all 6 of your FF.70s. We're going to show you how to install this onto the bracket once you have your lights on. So on this harness, we have one connector that is going to go from the ghost box under the hood, and then you have 6 connectors that are going to go to each light. I'm going to show you how to lay this onto the actual bracket and plug each one of these in. So first, you're going to want to identify the longest end of this harness, and you're going to plug that into the light that goes onto the driver's side of the vehicle. And the way you do this is you're going to fish this through this slot where the tabs are for each light and just slide it underneath right to where the plug is on the light. And once you have it in place, just go ahead and line up the connector on the light and push it all the way in until you hear a click. That's how you know it's in place. And essentially, you're just going to be repeating this with every single light on the bar. All right, now that we have all of our plugs plugged into each one of the lights, I'm going to show you how to cable tie and secure the excess of this harness to the bracket so that it just sits there nice and tight. So supplied in your kit is going to be a set of cable ties. These are really small, but they fit nicely on this bracket. You're just going to take each leg of the wiring harness and slide it into this indentation on each one of the brackets for each light here. And you can see it just kind of sitting in that little indentation there. And once you have it in place, you're going to secure it with a cable tie. So you're just going to send the end of the cable tie through the hole that's right above that indentation. Ensuring that the harness is still in place, you want to pull your cable tie tight to keep it in its spot there, just like that. And you're basically going to be repeating this process for all the tabs along this light bar to hold your harness in place. Now that we got the wiring harness in place and it's all cable tied in there, we're going to go ahead and just take some flush cuts and cut the ends of those cable ties off for a nice clean look. Now that we have our bracket fully assembled and the wiring harness in place, it's a good time to change the caps if you choose to do so. Really easy to do. You just take the lens cover off of the light first and just pop the cap off of the back of the light. And then you can just pop the green one on there. Really easy to do, but we're going to keep the black ones on this bar. All right, now let's show you guys how to install this bracket onto your Bronco. Before we put our light bar bracket on the Bronco, we're gonna prep the roof so that we're ready to have the wiring come through and bolt everything down. The first step is gonna be removing these accessory ready caps, and they're really easy to remove. There's just a tab on the top that you depress, and then this painted cap comes off. So make sure you do this on both sides. Underneath that cap, you're going to see two studs with two nuts on there. These are 10mm nuts. We're going to take these two 10mm nuts off of the car. And you're going to want to hang on to these and just maybe put them on the roof for now. Right underneath that, there is this plastic bracket, and you can just get rid of this, but you can put it next to your painted bracket. We're not going to be using those. And then repeat this process for the other side as well. It's always a good idea to keep all your factory components inside of a bag somewhere. You can maybe throw it in your glove box in case you ever do want to take your light bar off. You have these to put back on. Once you have this piece removed and you see your two studs exposed, you're going to use the bracket that we supply you guys to put on to the studs there. And you can see in the middle, there is a notch there. That's where your wiring harness is going to go through. On the Bronco body, there's typically a dimple or a raised elevated area there, and that tells you where the hole through the body is, and that's where we're going to actually drill the hole. So if you can identify where that's at, you can remove your bracket, and that's where you know you have to drill. We're going to use an 1/8 inch drill bit just as a pilot hole. And once we have our pilot hole drilled, we're going to open that up to a 3/8. Now that we got our 1/8 inch pilot hole opened up, we're going to use a 3/8 drill bit so that we can have a big enough hole for our wiring harness to feed through. Just go ahead and clean up some of the metal shavings that you see around here in this area. Now that we have our hole drilled, we're going to work on the inside of the Bronco. It's a lot easier to have the front roof panels removed, so we're going to take these off first. We're going to start running the wiring harness that goes from the ghost box under the hood, in through the firewall, and then up the A-pillar, and then out the roof to connect to our bracket harness. So we're going to pass our wiring harness through a large grommet that goes through the passenger side firewall of the Bronco. The best way to get to it is by first removing the coolant reservoir from its location. It's very simple. There's 3 bolts that hold it in place. You're going to use an 8mm socket to remove the 2 bolts that hold the top of the reservoir, and then the 1 bolt that's on the side down here. So go ahead and remove those 3 bolts, and then you can move the coolant reservoir out of the way to reach that grommet. Okay, so with our coolant reservoir out of the way, you can see the grommet that we have right here. So we are going to run our wiring harness through this grommet. If you have a better place you want to go through the firewall, that's up to you. This is a really big grommet where our wiring harness already goes through it, so it was just easy for us to cut a hole in there and pass our wiring harness through. Now that we moved inside the Bronco, we are going to take our wiring harness that we've already passed through the firewall, through the passenger side footwell, and we're going to route it up through the A-pillar and through the hole that we drilled in the roof so that we can connect it to the bracket that's on the roof. First, we're going to remove the passenger side visor. This is going to give us access to pull the panels down. That way we can work our wiring underneath. There's a small tab here. We're just going to pop out on the bracket for the visor. Inside of that, there's going to be a TORX 20 bolt that we're going to remove with our TORX 20 tool here. Now that we have the left side of the visor out, we're going to use our body panel puller for the right side. Just to pop that plastic piece out of the way. On the right side of the visor, there's a 7mm bolt that we're just going to undo once you have that clip out of the way. Now you can just maneuver the visor out of this hole and undo the wiring harness that's connected to it. Now we got our visor completely out of the way. Next, we're just going to remove this cover for the roof panel clip and just pop these clips out. Get this out of the way too. Now you're going to notice that there's a break here in between this panel that goes to the center overhead console and the A-pillar here. You're just going to pull down on this and you're going to notice that this will pop down too. Just like that. Now you have access to everything underneath this ceiling panel. Now we're going to work on fishing our wire up through the footwell and then up the A-pillar out to this point so we can get it through the roof. It's pretty easy once you get some of this stuff out of the way. We're going to remove a couple of things here just to get access behind this A-pillar. And once we do that, it's as easy as just pulling the wire up and getting it up through the roof. Next, we're going to remove the grab handles from this side, just giving us access to this kick panel area. So you're going to use a TORX bit just to undo all these bolts here. There's 4 bolts in total to take this out of the dashboard. There's one panel here covering the side curtain airbag, and this is something that we want to remove just so that we can gain access to the A-pillar. And it just really pops right out just like that, and you can set this aside. So we've got the end of our wiring harness here that we fished through the firewall, and now we're going to feed this up through the dash, through the A-pillar, and then out to the roof right here. So it's definitely a little bit tricky and it's tight in there to get that wire all the way up the A-pillar, but just take your time and make sure you don't run in front of the airbag, but you can get it all the way through. I've got the end of it here sticking out of our 3/8 hole that we drilled for the harness. And now I'm just going to feed the rest of the wire through that hole. So once we got our wires pulled all the way through the roof, the last step is just to apply some clear silicone. We're using Loctite waterproof sealant here, and this will just keep any rainwater or moisture from coming inside your Bronco through the hole that we just drilled. You just want to apply a nice bead all the way around the wiring harness, and that'll just ensure a nice seal. This will take about a day to cure. Now that we got all the hard stuff out of the way, you're just going to reverse the process in the interior by putting all those panels back together. And once you have the interior all dialed, you can put the roof panels back on. And then our next step is going to be taking the light bar onto the roof and installing it and then connecting the wiring. Now that we've got our wiring harness laid out all the way from the ghost box through the engine bay and the firewall into the cab and then out of the cab at the roof, it's time to bolt the light bar onto the Bronco. We're going to use these 2 brackets we showed you earlier, and as you can see, the passenger side bracket has a notch in it, and this is where the wiring harness will pass through this. The driver side bracket does not have that notch in there, so that's how you can tell the difference between the 2 of them. The best way to do this is to get some help from a friend by installing these brackets loosely. As you can see, the holes in them are a little bit ovaled out, so you have a little bit of adjustment there, and then you can bolt the actual light bar to these brackets, and when you have them set in the place that you want them, you can take the light bar off of the brackets, tighten these down onto the Bronco, and then put the light bar back on for final assembly. So up here on the roof, you can see we already have our wiring harness out through the hole that we drilled earlier. And then I was mentioning this notch in the passenger side bracket. So it's very simple. You're just gonna slide the bracket over the wiring harness and then down onto the studs. And this does have a little bit of adjustment. These holes are ovaled out, so you can actually move these brackets inward and outward of each other. And you wanna just snug these down for now so that you can get the light bar on there, and then you can adjust further from there. We're gonna reuse the two 10mm nuts that we removed from these studs earlier during the disassembly, and we're gonna actually just put these over the studs and again, snug them down by hand. Keep in mind that if you use a little bit too much silicone, this bracket may be raised up a little bit, so you may need to trim some of that silicone to get the bracket to sit down on top of the roof completely. And again, I'm just snugging these down. I'm not really tightening them fully yet. When it comes time to actually tightening these 10mm nuts on these studs coming out of the roof, you're gonna wanna tighten them to 7.7 foot-pounds or 92.4 inch-pounds, and that is the torque spec from Ford, so that you don't break these studs, because if you over tighten them, you will snap this stud off and you've got a much bigger problem. Now that we've got our light bar on the roof, I got some help from a friend. We're gonna place the light bar onto the brackets here. It's gonna sit on the outside of this bracket right here. And what you're gonna wanna do is line up these hex bolts and try to get them threaded by hand before you start using an actual tool to thread these in. And if they don't go in easy by hand, you need to take the light bar off and readjust your brackets so that they're lined up correctly. So we're gonna lift this up and just place it over the brackets. And as you can see, I need to push this bracket inward a little bit because it's not lining up. So we're gonna take this off real quick. Loosen our 10mm nuts here. Now that we've adjusted our brackets to sit closer a little bit, we're gonna try this again. And now you can see the bracket fits inside of the light bar, and we got our holes lined up here. We're just gonna start threading these bolts in by hand. And it may take a little bit of adjusting back and forth to get it to line up, but they should line up before you start tightening things down. These supplied hex bolts here are a 7/32 hex drive or Allen key, and these need a torque setting of about 33 foot-pounds. So we're just making sure this is all lined up right. We know that these work, so we're gonna take these back off and then tighten those 10mm nuts before we put this back on for a final assembly. Okay, so the final tightening of this bracket, you wanna make sure that you're torquing these to 7.7 foot-pounds or 92.4 inch-pounds. So we're just gonna kinda get them down by hand really quick, and then switch over to our torque wrench. So our torque wrench is in inch-pounds, so we're gonna set it to 92.4 and lock that in place. Now that we got our brackets torqued down, it's time for final assembly of the light bar. So we're just gonna lay this on top as we did before. Make sure you got your washers on your hex bolts here. And again, start hand threading these in. While you're tightening this down, you want to make sure you have an extension on this so that you're not scratching the paint on your windshield trim here. And we're just going to snug these down for now and then torque them the same way. Once you've got the light bar in place and all the bolts are snug, you want to take your torque wrench and set it to 33 foot-pounds and torque down all 4 of these hex bolts. All right, now that we got our light bar all bolted up to the roof, it's time to connect our wiring harness here on the light bar to the harness going to our ghost box. And this is just a standard connector here. As you can see, there is quite a bit of extra wire here, so I'm going to cable tie this out of the way for a nice clean finish. So our roof light wiring harness is very similar to our other wiring harnesses, where we have a positive and a negative feed as well as a DRL feed wire. These 3 wires are just going to go to one ghost box module that we have on our ghost box mount on top of the Bronco's battery. So very simply, we're just going to wire the red and black to the channel 2 positive and negative channels, and then the brown wire, which runs all the DRLs across all 6 of our FF70s, is going to go to the channel 1 positive post. Anytime you're wiring anything to a ghost box module or your battery, you want to make sure that you have the negative terminal off of the pole. First, I'm just going to remove all of the screws on the bus terminal for the positive and negative channel 2. Just to reiterate, channel 2 is our large amperage channel, up to 40 amps, so that's sufficient for the 6 FF.70s that we're going to be powering with this harness. So your ghost box will come with rubber seals in it. We've already removed those because the wiring harness does have pre-installed rubber seals on each wire. We're just going to put those in place and then start threading our terminal hardware through the bus terminal. Okay, now that we have all of our wires on the ghost box terminals all set up, we're going to put our bus terminal cover back on. And of course, very important, before you put the cover back on the ghost box, you want to make sure that your button cover is on the button, because you won't be able to reach that button through the dust cover once you have everything bolted back on top. And just verify that your seal on the dust cover itself is in place before putting it back onto the ghost box. So now we got our wiring harness all connected. The last piece to this install is going to be to angle our lights. And we set these lights on the bracket earlier, just somewhat loose, so that we can actually angle these once it was on the vehicle. However you want these angled is going to depend on the height of your vehicle, the height of your front end, and where exactly you want the light to be shining, further down or closer in front of your vehicle. It's very easy. You're going to take your 15mm and your 17mm wrenches and put them on the appropriate nut and bolt over here. Just loosen them up slightly, really making sure that you're not going to slip and break your windshield. Just very, very gently loosen this up. And once you have it a little bit loose, you can angle your light however you wish, and then tighten this back up. You're just going to repeat this process for all 6 of the lights on the bar. All right, guys, that's going to do it for our install today on the Series 1 roof bracket for the 2021 and up Ford Bronco. If you guys have any questions at all, please drop it in the comments below and let us know what you guys think of this light bar. We do have a lot of other brackets that were coming out for the Bronco, so be sure to subscribe to Project X so you guys get notified every time we make a video install from one of those. And if you guys are installing this roof bar at home, we'd love to see it, so be sure to tag us at Project X Off-Road.